I'm 79 years old. I've been sitting in this chair by the window for the better part of 3 years now, and I want to tell you something that I haven't told anyone. Not my daughter. Not the woman from the church who brings me soup on Tuesdays. Not the doctor who keeps asking me how I'm feeling emotionally, as though I might suddenly decide to tell him the truth. I want to tell you because you're a stranger. And right now, strangers feel safer than people who love me, because people who love me would try to fix it, and it can't be fixed. That's the whole point. I have a window. Ground floor apartment, Clement Street, San Francisco. I moved here after Margaret died. That was 3 years ago, October. Because our house in Walnut Creek had 42 years of her in it, and I couldn't be in a room without hearing her in the walls. So I came here. My daughter Rosalind found the place. She said the neighborhood was lively. She meant well. The window faces the sidewalk. I'm close enough that if someone looked in, they'd see me clearly. An old man in a gray cardigan, reading or not reading, watching. I started counting in January of last year. Not every single person, not precisely, but I kept a small notepad and I started marking groups of 10. Families, couples, people walking dogs, people on phones, people looking down, people looking up at nothing in particular. I don't know exactly why I started. Maybe because when you have too much time and too little purpose, you reach for whatever gives the hours some kind of shape. By my rough count, in 14 months, somewhere between 13 and 15,000 people have walked past that window. I spoke to none of them, not one. And I need you to understand something before I go further. I am not by nature a shy man. I was never shy. For 31 years, I ran a small architectural firm in the East Bay. I gave presentations to city councils. I managed 11 employees at our peak. I could talk to anyone. That was what Margaret always said about me. She said, "Richard, you could make conversation with a fence post." She wasn't wrong. So this isn't about shyness. This is about something that happened over so long a period of time that I didn't notice it happening. The way a house settles, the way a tree grows into a fence and eventually you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. That's what happened to me. That's what I want to tell you about. I was 34 when we moved to Walnut Creek. Margaret was 31. Rosalind was 4. We moved in on a Saturday in June of 1981, and our neighbor across the street, a man named Don Hartley, retired postal worker, maybe 60 at the time, came over with his wife Bev and a plate of brownies before we'd even finished unloading the truck. Don and I stood in the driveway for 45 minutes, just talking about the neighborhood, the schools, a plumbing issue he warned me about with the houses on our block. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. But we talked like we'd been neighbors for years. I think about that afternoon now, the ease of it, the complete absence of calculation, because somewhere between then and now, that ease left me. I couldn't tell you when. That's the honest answer. I couldn't point to a year and say, that's when I stopped opening the door. It happened the way most losses happen, which is quietly and without announcement, in the middle of ordinary life. The firm got busy in the late 80s. We had good years. I was working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week, and it felt justified because we were building something. And building something feels like it has a moral quality to it, like the hours are investments rather than just hours disappearing. I told myself that. Margaret was raising Rosalind largely on her own through those years, which she did without complaint, at least not to me. Maybe she complained to her sister Carol. I imagine she did. But she never made me feel the weight of it directly, and I let her not make me feel it. I accepted the shelter she was giving me from the reality of what I was doing. We had a colleague at the firm. His name was Frank Delgado. Frank and I started together in 1978, before the firm, when we were both junior architects at a larger company in Oakland. He was sharp, quiet, meticulous, the kind of man who'd stay an hour after everyone else just to get a drawing right. We worked together for 22 years. Frank got married in 1984. I was at the wedding. His wife's name was Teresa. They had 2 sons, Marco and Luis. I met the boys at the firm Christmas party, maybe 4 or 5 times over the years. Little kids in clip-on ties who were bored and polite. In 2001, Frank left the firm. We had some disagreements about the direction of the business, the kind that aren't really about business at all, but about accumulated small things that never got said. He left on decent terms. We shook hands. I said we should have lunch. We didn't have lunch, not once in the years after. I heard through a mutual contact that Frank retired in 2015. I heard he moved to Sacramento to be near Marco and the grandkids. I thought about calling him. I had his number somewhere. I thought about it the way you think about things you intend to do, which is to say I thought about it, and then I thought about something else. I don't know if Frank is still alive. That's what I'm left with. My brother-in-law, Margaret's brother, his name is Gerald. Gerald is 73 now. He lives in Portland. He and I were never what you'd call close friends, but for years we had a kind of comfortable familiarity. We'd see each other at Thanksgiving, at Christmas sometimes. We'd talk about baseball. He followed the Giants. I never really cared, but I'd follow along enough to have the conversation. After Margaret got sick, that was 2019, the diagnosis, Gerald called me regularly, every 2 weeks, more or less. He'd ask about her, ask about me. Sometimes he'd just call and we'd talk about nothing, which I understood was his way of saying he was there. She died in October of 2022. Gerald called me that week and the week after. Then about a month in, the calls got a little less frequent, the way they naturally do. And then at some point I realized I had stopped calling him, that I was waiting for him to call. I told myself he was giving me space. But I think the truth is that I just retreated, the way I had been retreating for 30 years in smaller ways. And this time there was nothing left to interrupt the retreat. It's been 7 months since Gerald and I spoke. 7 months. He is the last person alive who knew Margaret as a child, who knew her before she was Margaret, my wife, who has stories about her I've never heard, and I haven't called him. I'm telling you that plainly. I haven't called him. There was a woman I used to see from my window. This would have been about 18 months ago, before I started counting. She walked past every morning, early, maybe 7:30, always with a small brown dog, some kind of terrier mix. And she walked slowly, the way people walk when they're in their 70s, not from laziness, but from the body asking for a different pace. She had white hair, short, and she wore a yellow jacket in the winter months that I came to look for. I saw her for, I'd estimate, 4 months. Then one morning she wasn't there. Then she wasn't there the next day. Then the yellow jacket didn't appear again. I don't know what happened. She might have moved. She might have died. She might have simply changed her route. I will never know because she was only ever a figure behind glass to me, and I made no effort to change that. She was company of a kind, the accidental company of proximity, and when she was gone I felt something small and specific, a missing that I had no right to, because I had never tried to know her. I think about her sometimes. I don't know why I think about her more than I think about some people I worked with for years. Maybe because she never had the chance to be complicated. Margaret had a stroke in August of 2022. She'd had smaller incidents before that, TIAs, the doctors called them, and we knew her heart was weakened. But the August stroke was different. She was in the hospital for 16 days, and she came home, and she was different. Still herself, but quieter in a way that I didn't quite know how to be with. There were 10 weeks between her coming home and her dying. In those 10 weeks, I was present in the way that a person can be present and also somehow not fully there. I did the practical things. I managed the medications, the home nurse visits, the calls to Rosalind. I sat with Margaret every evening. We watched television, mostly old programs she liked, British detective shows. I held her hand. But there was a conversation I kept not having. I kept thinking there was time. We had the evening routine. We had the television shows. I told myself she was tired and I didn't want to burden her. I told myself there would be a better moment. The conversation I kept not having was simple. It was just, tell me what you need me to know. Tell me what I never asked you. Tell me who you were before I knew you, and what you were afraid of, and what you wanted that you didn't say. 48 years of marriage, and I never asked her that. Not once. Not fully. Not with the openness that a question like that requires. She died on a Tuesday morning, October 11th. I was in the kitchen making coffee. Rosalind was in the room with her. And just like that, the possibility of the conversation was gone. Not postponed. Gone. The word I keep coming back to is permanently. It was permanently, irrevocably gone. I thought I had time. I had spent our entire marriage thinking I had time. The calls I didn't return. There's a box of them in my memory. My mother called me every Sunday until she was 81 and too unwell to manage it. Toward the end, I'd let some of those calls go to the machine because I was tired, or I was watching something, or I I didn't have the energy to show up fully, and I told myself it was kinder to call back when I was really present. I called back most of the time, but not always. And she died at 83, and the calls I let go to the machine are all I can think about now. There were trips we talked about. Margaret wanted to go to Portugal. She had a book about it, one of those travel memoirs, and she'd read passages to me sometimes. We said we'd go when I retired. I retired in 2009. We still didn't go. There was always a reason. Money, timing, her knees, my reluctance, which I dressed up as practicality. We never went to Portugal. The unsaid words. This is the one that I find hardest. I am not an unaffectionate man. I told Margaret I loved her. I want to be clear about that. But there are specific things, specific moments of gratitude, of recognition, of witnessing another person clearly, that I let pass without saying anything. A dinner she made that I knew she'd worked hard on, and I ate it and said it was good. But I didn't say what I was actually thinking, which was that I was lucky, that I was genuinely lucky to be sitting at that table. I thought it. I didn't say it. Why? I have no answer that I respect. Habit, I think. The habit of not saying the full thing. The habit of keeping a small distance, not from coldness, but from some old idea I had about composure, about not being the kind of man who made a scene of his feelings. Nobody was hurt by that idea more than the people who deserved to hear from me most. I'm 79 years old, and I live near a window, and people walk past, and I watch them. If you're younger than me, and statistically you almost certainly are, I want to say a few things. Not as instruction. I'm done with instruction. Just as what I know from where I'm sitting. If I could go back, I would have asked more questions. Not about facts or opinions, but about people's inner lives. I would have asked Margaret what she was afraid of. I would have asked Frank what he thought about when he drove home from the office. I would have asked my mother about her life before she was my mother. I spent decades in conversations that stayed at the surface, and I thought that was politeness. I think now it was a kind of cowardice. What I didn't understand was that every act of connection requires a small amount of willingness to be exposed, and I mistook protecting myself for protecting other people. I thought I was being unburdensome. I was actually just being absent. There's a difference, and I wish someone had helped me see it while I still had the full life in front of me. If I could go back, I would have returned the calls the same day, every time. Not because it's a rule, but because I know now what it means to have called and gotten no answer. To have needed someone and found instead that the door was closed without explanation. My mother knew that feeling because of me. Some people who reached out to me over the years knew that feeling because of me. I can't unknow that. What I didn't understand was that connection doesn't maintain itself. I thought it was like a bank account, that if you'd known someone for 20 years, those 20 years were stored up somewhere and would still be there when you decided to pay attention again. They're not stored anywhere. They only exist in the present moment of paying attention. Every week you don't call is a week the connection thins. I let connections thin until some of them simply ceased to exist while the people were still alive. That is a specific kind of loss that I don't have a clean word for. If I could go back, I would sit at the window and actually speak to someone. I'd open the window or go to the door or walk outside, and I'd say something to the woman in the yellow jacket. Not because it would have changed anything enormous, just because she was there. Because she walked past every morning with her small dog, and that meant something, some tiny common life. And I let it pass in silence. The woman in the yellow jacket. I should have said good morning. That's what I'm left with. Good morning. I've been thinking about what Gerald would say if I called him today. I think he'd be relieved. I think he might be angry for a moment, or confused, and then relieved. He's 73. He also knows that time is doing what time does. He might understand without my having to explain very much. I'm going to call Gerald. I'm saying that here to you as a kind of commitment, because I have been thinking about calling Gerald for 7 months, and the only thing that's changed today is that I'm saying it out loud to someone, even a stranger, even through a screen. Maybe that'll be enough to make me do it. Maybe not. I'm being honest. I'm 79 years old. My hands have a tremor now that I didn't have 2 years ago. I sleep less. The mornings are long. But I'm still here, which is not nothing. And the window is still there. And tomorrow morning there will be more people walking past. I'm going to try to open the door. I don't know if I will. That's the most honest thing I can tell you. I don't know if 40 years of a certain kind of living can be undone by a decision made at a window at 79. But I think the trying has to count for something, or I need to believe it does. If this found you at a useful moment, I'm glad I said it. There's a short book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. She spent years as a palliative care nurse, and she wrote down what people told her at the end of their lives. I wish I had read it at 50. There's also a book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. It's about the collapse of community life in America, more academic, but it explains something about why so many of us ended up this way, alone in rooms watching strangers through glass. And it's useful to understand it wasn't just personal failure. And finally, a thin old book called The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Fiction, but the truest account I've ever encountered of what it costs to keep yourself back from life. You don't have to have read anything. You just have to stay a little less behind the glass than I did. If you're willing to leave a thought, I read them. An old man doesn't have too much else to do in the morning. There are more stories here, if you want them. Real ones. From the end of a long life that was, in many ways, a good one. That's the part that makes it hard to explain to people. It was a good life. I loved my wife. I raised a daughter. I built things. And still. Good morning.